Welcome back to Supporting Physician Spouses. I'm Kendra, and today I'm doing something a little different. This is another solo episode, just me, and it's in response to two things I've come across recently that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. The first was a post from a therapist on social media, someone who works exclusively with physicians, and he made the point that despite what we might have heard, physician divorce rates are actually lower than the general population. And his takeaway was essentially, don't worry about it. It's not as bad as people say. And the second was a really thoughtful podcast episode I was listening to that featured a psychiatrist who has spent decades working with physician couples. And in that episode, he mentioned something almost in passing, that even when infidelity is involved, most physician marriages don't end in divorce. And I sat with both of those things, and here's where I landed. Not divorced is not the same thing as happy. And I think that distinction matters a lot, especially for the people listening to this podcast. So here's what we're digging into today. Before I get into the research, I want to share something that I've observed in my own coaching practice because I think it illustrates this point better than any statistic can. When I start working with a new client, we almost never start with a marriage. We start somewhere safer. Maybe she wants to lose weight. Maybe she's worried about one of her kids. Maybe she wants to build better habits or figure out how to carve out more time for herself. Those are the things that she leads with. And I don't steer her away from those things. They are real and they matter. But as we get more comfortable with each other, as she starts to trust the space, something shifts. The marriage comes up. Not because I pushed her there, but because she finally feels safe enough to go there herself. And what strikes me every time is that she almost always leads with an apology. I know this isn't really what we're here to talk about, or I don't want to complain because I know how hard he works, but that he says everything. She has learned somewhere along the way that her unhappiness in her marriage is not legitimate enough to be the headline. It has to be smuggled in under the cover of something else. That is a problem. And it's a problem that divorce statistics will never capture. I'm not disputing the data. Maybe physician divorce rates are lower. I will take that at face value. But here's the thing. Divorce is a legal and financial event. It tells us that a marriage ended on paper. It tells us nothing about what was happening inside that marriage before it ended, or inside the ones that are still legally intact. So when someone says, don't worry, they don't divorce as often, what they're measuring is dissolution. What they're not measuring is loneliness, disconnection, the slow erosion of your sense of self, the feeling that you exist in your marriage primarily as a support system for someone else's career. Those things don't show up in divorce statistics, but they show up in my work every single day. And here is what I think is actually going on in a lot of physician marriages that stay together. Staying is the lesser of two evils, not because the marriage is good, but because leaving is harder. And if you are a physician listening to this, or if a physician is listening alongside their spouse, I want to say something directly to you. Your spouse is thinking about divorce more than you may be willing to acknowledge. That's not an accusation. That's something that comes through in research and in the real lives of the women I work with. The thought is there. The question is whether the two of you will address what's underneath it before it becomes something bigger. Think about what it actually means to leave a physician marriage. You're not just ending a relationship. For many physician spouses, especially those who followed a partner through training, through residency, through fellowship, through multiple moves to cities where you knew absolutely no one, you were looking at economic dependency. Maybe you scaled back your own career. Maybe you stepped out of the workforce entirely during your childbearing years. You don't have the same earning power you once did, and starting over feels terrifying. Then there's loss of identity and status. Being a physician spouse carries some social weight. Your community, your friendships, your kids' school, your neighborhood. A lot of that is directly tied to your physician partner's world. And walking away from the marriage can feel like walking away from your entire life. Most physician spouses I know can trace their friendships and social networks almost entirely back to their partner's world. If the marriage ends, those connections often go with it. And then there's the sunk cost, the years you spent waiting for things to get better, the moves, the deferred dreams, the promises of, once I finish training, it'll be your turn. Promises that were made with the best of intentions and then quietly never honored. All of that makes staying feel rational, even if staying is making you miserable. So when someone tells you physician divorce rates are lower and frames that as good news, I want you to sit with that for a second. Because a marriage that persists is not automatically a marriage that's working. Sometimes it's just a marriage that's too complicated to leave. I want to bring some research into this conversation because I think data can be really clarifying when we're talking about things that are otherwise hard to name. In my own research, looking specifically at physician spouses, it was interesting to note that spouses report lower fulfillment as an individual and as a partner than they do as a parent. This primary source of fulfillment in a physician-spouse life is parenting, not the marriage, not herself as an individual, but kids. Now, being a devoted parent is a beautiful thing, and I am not diminishing that for 1 second. But when parenting becomes the primary thing a woman's sense of worth is organized around, and the partnership is somewhere further down the list, that tells us something important about what's missing. My research also echoes what others have found about what actually predicts satisfaction in these marriages. And the number one factor? Time. Specifically, time awake and alone together. Not the physician's specialty, not how many hours they work, not their practice setting, just time together. Dr. Tate Shanafelt published a study in 2013, and what made it distinctive is that it surveyed nearly 900 spouses and partners of physicians directly, rather than asking physicians about their own marriages. And his team found that minutes spent awake together each day was the single strongest predictor of relationship satisfaction, showing what researchers call a dose-response effect. More time together equals more satisfaction. Less time together equals less satisfaction. It is not complicated, but it is hard in the context of a medical career. In my own research, I found that the sweet spot, the amount of awake, present time together that measurably moves the needle on how satisfied a spouse feels, is about 90 minutes or more per day. And this is not parallel activity where you're in the same room on your phones. We're talking about actual present, connected time. I also want to highlight one more finding because I think it's the most immediately actionable thing in this entire episode. That when a physician voices genuine and specific appreciation for what their spouse contributes to their shared life, the spouse's satisfaction goes up. This has nothing to do with restructuring the schedule. This is not a grand gesture. This is being seen, being thanked, being acknowledged. So if you are a physician and your partner manages your household, your children, your schedule, and all of the invisible labor, and you are not regularly telling them that you see it and that it matters, that is a gap worth closing today. So if time together is the thing, if those 90 minutes a day are what moves the needle, what does that actually look like in practice? Because I know that for a lot of physician households, spend more time together can feel like advice that sounds good and lands nowhere. Life gets in the way. The schedule gets in the way. Exhaustion gets in the way. And I've talked about this on the podcast before, but I want to revisit it here because it fits so naturally into what we're discussing today. It's something my husband and I use in our own relationship, and it's something I recommend regularly. It's called the 2-2-2 rule. The idea is simple. Every 2 weeks, a date night. Every 2 months, an overnight getaway, just the two of you. And every 2 years, a vacation that is just the two of you, no kids. And what I love about this framework is that it builds a rhythm. It takes the question of when are we going to make time for each other off the table because the answer is already built into the calendar. It doesn't require a long conversation or a negotiation every time. The structure does the heavy lifting. For us, my husband and I, we have found this rhythm to work really well for us. And when we veer off of it, When life gets busy and we let a couple of months slide without a date or without an overnight, we feel it. The connection frays a little. Yes, we're still functioning as a household, but something is missing between us as a couple. And the 2-2-2 rule is what helps us find our way back. Now, I want to name an obstacle that I think is real and important, especially for people who are listening while they're still in medical school or residency training, because those years are truly financially constrained in a way that the rest of a physician's career usually isn't. Day nights cost money, babysitters cost money, overnight trips cost money, a vacation for 2, no kids, costs money. And if you are in that season right now, if money is tight and the schedule is brutal and the idea of a getaway feels like a luxury you can't justify, I hear you. I don't want that obstacle to become an excuse for letting the relationship drift entirely, because here's what I've seen. And I'll be honest, this is what we lived during medical school and residency too. And so from the other side, I can tell you it's not worth it. The years of training are when couples grow the most disconnected. And that disconnection, if it goes unaddressed, can become the foundation you're building the rest of your marriage on. So get creative. A date doesn't have to be expensive. It just has to be intentional and uninterrupted. A walk where you're actually talking, a drive, a picnic, 45 minutes at a fast food place when you're not on your phones and you're not talking about logistics. The budget isn't always the barrier, the intention is. An overnight doesn't have to be a hotel. It can be a night at a friend's place while they're out of town. It can be a borrowed cabin. I wish I had one to loan you. It can be cheap and a little scrappy. What matters is that you are physically away from the responsibilities of home, the kids, the laundry, the to-do list, and that you are just two people who choose each other. These years, medical school, residency, early attending life, are the years when the 2-2-2 rule can benefit you the most, precisely because they're the years when you're most at risk of losing each other in the grind. Don't let the logistics hijack your relationship during the season when protecting it matters the most. So let's talk about what it actually looks like inside these marriages that stay together, because it isn't always what it looks like from the outside. There is a pattern I hear described over and over from research, from other clinicians in my own coaching, that couples drift so far apart that they stop communicating as partners. They communicate as co-parents or as roommates managing a household, as two people who are excellent at coordinating logistics but have lost track of each other as people. To the outside world, that marriage looks fine. There's usually a nice house. The kids are busy in activities. Nobody's getting divorced. But inside that marriage, one or both people is deeply lonely. There's also the physician who comes home with nothing left in their tank, who is technically present in the house, but emotionally checked out. That happens to everyone sometimes. The problem is when it becomes the default, when a spouse has stopped expecting emotional presence because she's learned not to count on it. And I've seen what comes next. She stops bringing things up because it feels pointless. She stops making plans because they get canceled. She stops reaching out because she's learned not to expect a response. And eventually, she stops feeling like a partner and starts feeling like a logistical necessity. None of that triggers a divorce filing, but all of it is suffering, and that suffering is invisible in the statistics. The most insidious thing that can happen in a physician marriage, more insidious than the dramatic crisis, the affair, the blow up, whatever it is, it's the slow, quiet disappearance of yourself. It happens gradually. You start making your schedule around theirs. You start filtering what you bring up based on whether it's a bad week. You start measuring your own needs against the needs of a person who is objectively doing something important and demanding. And in that, you decide your needs don't measure up. You give up things. Maybe your career, maybe ambitions you had, maybe friendships that just got too hard to maintain after the third move. And at some point, you look up and realize that your entire identity has organized itself around your spouse's life, their schedule, their career, their needs. And this connects directly back to what I see in my coaching work. Remember what I said earlier, that my clients come to me with the safe stuff first: weight loss, kids, habits. That pattern isn't accidental. It reflects something a lot of physician spouses have internalized, and that is that their needs around their marriage aren't legitimate enough to lead with. That is not a communication problem. That is a self-worth problem that has been shaped by years of being in a relationship where one person's needs, by circumstance, I'll give you that, not by intention, but that one person's needs have consistently took priority. And this is why the fulfillment finding matters so much. If the primary source of fulfillment in your life is your children, that tells me the partnership isn't filling the cup. Somewhere along the way, the person in this marriage got lost. Not the mother, not the household manager. She's there, the person. I want to come back to something that was mentioned in the podcast episode that I referenced because it connects directly to the divorce rate conversation. The psychiatrist mentioned that research shows the vast majority of couples, even after an affair, do not divorce. And to his credit, he was quick to add, that is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. He made that very clear. But here is what I want to make clear. If you survive an affair and stay together, and many couples do, and many go on to rebuild something real, you do not come out of that with the same marriage. You come out with what he called a new normal. The old marriage is gone. You are building something different. So when someone cites the divorce rate as evidence that physician marriages are doing fine, they may be counting couples who are in therapy actively trying to rebuild after infidelity. That is not evidence of a thriving marriage culture. That is evidence of complicated people making complicated choices under difficult circumstances. Again, not divorced is not the same as happy. I want to address physicians directly for a moment because I know some of you listen and I think this message is important. That drive is part of who you are, and it's part of why you are good at what you do. But that same drive, if it gets applied exclusively to your career, will cost you your marriage. Not necessarily in a dramatic way, but in the slow, quiet way where the person you built a life with stops feeling like your partner and starts feeling like a roommate who manages your household. Wayne Sotil is a psychologist who spent decades studying physician marriages and who co-authored the Shanafelt research I referenced. He put it this way in his book. You gained your station and status in life by doing more than other people. You studied more, worked more, sacrificed more, and endured more. If you want to escape becoming one of those couples who are living together in semi-misery, enduring rather than enjoying their lives and each other, you'll have to do more for your marriage than they do for theirs. I love that framing because it speaks the language of someone wired to achieve. It's not asking you to become a different person. It is asking you to apply the same intentionality to your marriage that you already apply to everything else in your life. Start with 90 minutes of present connected time each day. Put the 2-2-2 rule on the calendar, the date nights, the overnights, the vacations. Say thank you, specifically, concretely for what your partner does. And if you're still in training and money is tight, get creative. The investment doesn't have to be expensive. It just has to be intentional. And now to you, the physician spouse who's been listening and maybe recognizing yourself in some of what I've described. Your unhappiness is real, even if there is no dramatic crisis to point to. You don't need an affair or a blow-up or a rock-bottom moment to justify feeling like something in your marriage isn't working. Quiet suffering counts. Loneliness inside a marriage counts. Feeling like you've lost yourself counts. And the fact that you came to me or to any coach or therapist talking about your weight or your kids or your habits, and you eventually found your way to talking about your marriage, that is not weakness. That is you gradually giving yourself permission to name what's actually going on. Keep doing that. The goal isn't to end your marriage. The goal is to have a marriage that is genuinely worth staying in. A marriage where you feel seen, valued, and like your needs matter just as much as the person you're supporting. That might mean couples therapy. It might mean individual work on figuring out who you are outside of this marriage. It might mean finding community with people who understand this specific experience. And it might mean having a conversation you've been putting off. Not an ultimatum, just, I need you to know how I'm feeling. I need us to talk about this. You have permission to want more. That's what this space is for. All right, to bring it back to where we started, if someone tells you that physician marriages are fine because they don't divorce as often, I want you to remember this episode, because the metric they're using doesn't capture what matters. We should not be measuring success by whether a marriage survives. We should be measuring it by whether the people inside that marriage are genuinely fulfilled, both of them. That is a much higher bar, and it's the right one. Thank you so much for being here today. If this episode resonated with you, please share it, especially with another physician spouse who might need to hear that what they're feeling is real and that they're not in it alone. If you want to connect or explore working together, you can find me at itgetsbetternow.com or on social media at Kendra_itgetsbetternow or at Supporting Physician Spouses. We'll be back next week. Until then, take care of yourselves.